I don't even know how to start. I guess I'll start by saying that if I cry at any point during this video, I'm very sorry. I hate crying in front of people. Don't like to do it. Really didn't want to ever have to make this video. I'm sure some of you know by now, especially if you follow me on social media, my precious senior dog that you all have come to know and love, Frank, has passed away a week ago, actually. And I knew this day would come someday, and but there's a part of you that just always kind of hopes it never will. I was trying to decide if I even wanted to make this video. Number one, because I haven't even posted in so long, and then I decided to come back with this sad news. But I decided to because selfishly, I think it's going to help me grieve a little bit, but also just a really good way to celebrate his life. It's because he was the best. So I obviously want you guys to know what happened, but I also don't really plan to dwell on the sad part of it. I really want it to be kind of a video of all the ways that Frank is awesome, just like a tribute to him. So if you're new here, I adopted Frank when he was 10. This was 3 years ago. And he was with an elderly couple down in Texas. One had passed away and the other went into a nursing home. And the family members didn't want to, couldn't take Frank, not really sure. So he ended up at a shelter. And at the time, I was looking for a dog, specifically a senior. So I got in contact with this one rescue organization, the Joshua Fund, told them what I was looking for. And they didn't have any senior dogs at the time, but told me that they would be in contact. They had my application. They'd let me know. And I think it was maybe 2 days later, Frank shows up there. And right away, they got in touch with me. And right away, I said, yes, let me have him. And we were, sorry. We were just a perfect match. I feel like we both had hit the lowest point in our lives, and then we ended up coming into each other's lives when we needed one another the most. And then both of our lives just got immensely better because of it. It's like we had this sadness that we both put aside and made each other our new normal. And he was my family. I live alone. I've always lived alone. I love living alone. But it became just so routine and so awesome to have Frank in my little system. And so now I feel like I lost my best friend. It feels very empty and sad here, but I can't even begin to tell you how much it was worth it. Dang it. Okay. Back in November, Frank had randomly had a grand mal seizure. So ever since I adopted him, he had always had focal seizures, like head tremors. His head would just kind of bop back and forth, but he'd snap out of it quick and he was conscious, and it was just, I wasn't sure what it was. So I asked the vet. The vet said probably a form of a seizure. He could have epilepsy, and to just monitor it. And they only came every once in a while, and they didn't bother him. So it was never an issue to me. But then he had that one seizure. So then I was maybe a little bit more concerned, but also I didn't have him the first 10 years of his life. So maybe he had seizures before, and this was just my first time witnessing one. I wasn't sure, but it was a really scary night. You've never seen your dog have a seizure, and then he just first of all, he went blank, and then he just collapsed to the ground. I had no idea. I'm I don't know if he's dying. I don't know what's happening. Obviously, shortly after, I realized what was going on. But once he snapped out of it, it lasted probably 30 seconds. He was just down for the count, would not get off the floor for literally 5 hours straight. I was up all night with him, just making sure that he was okay, that he was comfortable. Eventually he did get up and get into his bed, but then just slept through the whole night. And when we got up the next morning, very quickly he was back to himself. And he stayed that way for a long time. No issues besides his paw injuries. He was always hurting his paws because he did not realize apparently his age. I'm telling you, this guy was always getting himself hurt. But then in about mid-January, I was in the middle of my night class. Luckily, I was home. It's all over Zoom. And he's laying over here on his ottoman, and he had another seizure. So it didn't bother me like the first one, because I had just assumed, oh, here's another one that I'm witnessing. And he had snapped out of it really quick. He wasn't out of it like he was for the first one. He just like got up and came with me to bed and everything was fine. But that night, in the middle of the night, I heard him get up. A lot of times he'd get up on my bed and then jump down onto his bed. And so I turned on the light and then realized he was having another one. And this was 5 or 6 hours after the first one. That made me nervous, obviously. And he continued to have a few more into the morning. So I called the vet. They didn't seem too concerned. They just said, keep an eye on him, keep a log. If they become violent, he can't snap out of it or whatever, then, bring him in for some blood work. And eventually he had finally stopped, again, went back to normal. And I thought things were good. And he had another one that night. So over the course of, I think it was 36 hours, he had 9 seizures. So I did end up taking him in for blood work. My dad came down and helped me bring him to the vet. And this was the scariest time because it just seemed like I was afraid it was his downfall. Like it was going to be one after the other, after the other, after the other, and we weren't going to be able to put an end to them. That's what I was afraid of. Before I even get the results back, the vet is like, I just want to warn you, when we see seizures like this in old dogs, it's usually not because it's epilepsy. Basically trying to prepare me for what news was going to come. At that moment, I really felt like, dang, After the vet visit, he had one more seizure and then he was good. Let me just add, for an old dog, Frank was so full of life. Life was just so exciting for him. Like he had arthritis, like I said, always getting injured, but he still just always wanted to play, he just like so full of life. So to see him sick with something that I can do nothing about, he just wants to love life and I can't help him do that. So the vet had given me some seizure meds to give him just in case they didn't stop, which I didn't end up giving him because once you give them to him, you can't stop. So I got CBD oil instead, and it seemed to help. I mean, again, there was no track record. I didn't know if this was completely out of the ordinary, if he had episodes like this before, but he had the CBD oil and he seemed to be doing well. And then when the blood work came back, the vet had informed me that the blood work showed he most likely had cancer, I think based on his protein levels, and couldn't determine what kind of cancer it was, if there was anything more I could do. She said that there was another blood work test I could do to kind of dive a little deeper. And so I opted for that. Like, let's do it. And once that came back, she was basically like, oh yeah, that confirms that he has cancer. Not what kind of cancer. It was like, well, thanks for nothing. And I don't want to bash the vet. I'm sure once pets get older, there's only so much that they can do. So I basically just told myself, I'll take that information and just, my goal here is to just make sure Frank is living his best life and he's happy and comfortable. I even, actually, we had another vet look at the blood work for a second opinion, and she said that the blood work didn't look like there were any issues. His proteins were a little high, but nothing concerning, but that it did seem like he had a sensitive spleen, and they took an x-ray of that, and it was an enlarged spleen. So that could have been an issue. But anyway, we gave him the CBD for a while, which, like I said, was helping. Then he would start having one every few weeks, and then it started getting to be one every week. And then one day he ended up having 2 in one day. And at this point, so the issue was Frank's seizures were happening when he was doing the things that he loved. Mostly when I'd play fetch with him, or once I took him for a walk. He was so super, super excited about it. And we got out to the sidewalk and he had a seizure in the middle of the road. It was always when he'd get excited to do the things that he loves doing. So that was even more defeating. Do I avoid doing the things that he loves because it's going to cause a seizure? So that's when the vet was like, start him on the medication. So we did. This was probably a month ago. That seemed to help for a little bit. But he was a little bit clumsy, off balance, which was a common side effect that was supposed to wear off with time. We got a little bit desperate. I say we because there's been so much going on in my life. I've been traveling so much, so he's been with my parents a lot, which is another thing that I feel really guilty about. The seizures were getting bad. They were causing injuries, kind of affecting his vision a little bit. So it wasn't like have a seizure, recover. It was more like, what is the next seizure going to do to him? That's what was scary. So again, meds helped for a little bit, but he'd have another seizure and they just kept getting worse. I had come home from being in California with my sister, and my parents told me that I should come see Frank because he wasn't doing well. So my hope, of course, was that I knew that he had a seizure. He had a seizure while I was on the plane. So I was hoping I would come back, help him perk up, and it was just like a longer recovery like he's had in the past. So once I got there, he definitely seemed a little down in the dumps, wasn't really himself, and he actually had another seizure while I was there. But after that one, he seemed to perk up a little bit. He went outside, he was eating grass, running around, not really running, trotting more so. And he had picked his ball up and was slapping it around like he does. So I thought he was better. But then that night he started to mosey around again. And then the next day was kind of the same, just like a slow decline a little bit. And then it was last Monday night. I woke up in the middle of the night because I heard him he was not comfortable. He was moving from his bed to the ground and like kind of just standing there. And so again, it woke me up. So I went to check on him and he was sitting down, breathing a little rapidly, just looking uncomfortable, and was trying to get up at one point, but couldn't. His back legs just kept getting weaker and weaker and weaker ever since he started taking the medicine. I don't know if it was the medicine or if it was something totally different, but it was hard for him to move. He didn't want to eat. Did I say that? He didn't want to eat, which clearly is unlike him because he loves food. And there was just no sign of joy left in him. And that's when I knew it was time. It was a really hard decision to make. I didn't want to be too hasty. I was hoping maybe he would recover, but it was just, I'm at least thankful that there was no question in my mind. He couldn't go on the way that he was. And I think he was letting me know that too. Dang it. Sorry. I know I said I was going to not spend a lot of time on that, but I just gave you pretty much all the details. No, I left some stuff out, but that was the gist of it. So my channel is not about sadness. So we're going to talk about happy Frank things. I'll just say the hardest part of it was feeling like he had just a lot of life left in him, and there was nothing I could do to prevent those seizures from ruining his life. But anyway, let me just finish this video by talking about all the reasons that I loved Frank and how he was just so awesome. To start, he was just the most loyal, protective companion I could have ever asked for. He guarded the house like no other. He would instinctually bark at strangers when he knew they were making me uncomfortable, followed me around everywhere. And this was the best because Frank, not a big cuddler. He just was no. And very independent. I mean, when he wanted to go to bed, he went to bed. He just trudged there. That was his... He decided. But he still always wanted to be around me. And I feel like that's how I really knew that he loved me. He didn't need me to pet him or give him attention. He just wanted to be with me. Slept in my room every night. If we went to somebody else's house, he'd make sure he stayed with me. Laid in my office while I worked. He was just like my protector. He would even I'd be sitting here out on the couch. He'd be sleeping and he'd wake up out of a dead sleep, look over, make sure I was still there, and then go back to sleep. He was also just so fun and funny. I loved how excited he'd get about playing fetch and kicking the ball around. If he could do that for hours, he would. He loved playing fetch. And he loved swimming. One time we took him to the boat launch and he swam around the landing into some neighbor's house, ended up in their yard, and they had to bring him back to us. He also had the smelliest toots I've ever smelled. I mean, even during the times he was on a chicken and rice diet, they still stunk. And he would scare the living daylights out of himself every time he farted. Jump up and run away. I always wanted to get that on tape, but I never could. Just, you never know when it's coming. And he was also just like so well behaved. Aside from when the mailman came by, it was really hard to get him to stop barking. I don't know what it was with him and the mailman, but he'd let me clip his toenails, just lay there, let me grab his paws. He'd let me tend to his injuries, dry him off with a towel. He actually loved that. I would hold out the towel and he'd like nosedive into it. He loved kids and he loved babies. He loved just licking them right on the cheeks, face cheeks. He was just so gentle with them. Oh, and like I said, he was a major foodie, especially when it came to chicken. I think the only thing he wouldn't eat was lettuce. That was it. And his kibble when he'd get tired of it. He'd let me know, like, okay, I'm sick of this stuff. Can we get something new? But he loved vegetables. Whenever I'd be cooking and he'd hear me chopping, he'd come right in because he knew I'd throw him some raw veggies. Loved zucchini. I think that was his favorite. Nothing beat chicken, though. He could sniff that out of the refrigerator before it was like with the door shut. And this might sound stupid, but he was just so soft. Everything about him was soft. His fur, his tongue when he'd like give you kisses, it's so soft. He had a soft, gentle expression. He was never vocal with you, you know, like when he'd want to wake me up, he'd either jump on the bed and put his head on my arm or would stand on the floor and just like tap his toenails until I'd wake up. One of his most famous greetings, his way of saying hi, is he just like plows himself right in between your legs. I think it's also partly a way for him to like scratch his back, come through and then come back in the back and then just always going in and out. Oh, and speaking of tap dancing, when he knew you were gonna throw him the ball, he would just like tap his feet in anticipation, like so much excitement. And he really wasn't scared of much except thunderstorms. He would hide in the bathroom. I'll never forget things like witnessing the first time that he experienced snow or the way he just like punched the door when he was ready to come inside. During the day, he would just like lay out in the grass, especially if it was sunny. Just do nothing, just lay there and like take in the smells. Or how he'd perk up his head at me when in the morning while we're laying in bed and I click my phone off. He knew once he heard that click, it was time to get up. He'd perk up really quick. And when we'd go for walks, I'd hold up his harness and he'd just shove his head right through just in anticipation. So exciting. Or the way he'd sneak up on the couch when he wasn't supposed to, either while I was napping or right after I left the house. Or randomly put my computer wire on his nose while I was working. Always with the wires. He always just let the wire hang right on his nose and just stare at me. Never quite understood that. I'm gonna miss everything about him. He was the best. I feel like he was taken from me too soon, but then I also have to remind myself that no amount of time with him ever would have been enough. I am so, so, so grateful to have had him in my life for those 3 years. And I truthfully thanked God for him daily because he just brought so much joy to every single day of my life. All I can hope now is that we will be reunited someday. And I said this in my first video I ever made of Frank. I will never have another first dog. And I'm just so lucky that it was him. Sorry that this was a super long video. I guess I just, for my own sake, wanted to try to get in all the information so that I'll never forget it. And I know a lot of you loved Frank just as much as I did. So thank you all for being involved in his life and giving him love from afar. And thank you for watching. Hi, buddy. Hi.
He barks at new people.
Welcome home. Yay! You ready to go inside? We need to work on our leash skills. Come on, bunny. Come on. Good boy. Frank is getting his first ice cream dish ever. Are you so excited? Good boy.